So it is the last day of Realm Makers, and this morning it's Sunday, and so I hadn't really read my Bible much this weekend, and so I really just wanted to hear from the Lord. Something that if you follow me on social media and on YouTube, you will recognize is that I feel like I live this like two different lives, in the sense of me and my husband have a running business and I work full time in that area, and that really consumes a lot of our life. And on the flip side, I have a passion for writing and imagination and storytelling. And for a while, probably the past couple of years, I have really wondered in the back of my head, how do these two things connect? I feel like I always was battling, especially on social media and like trying to produce content. Do I focus on the running aspect and the fact that we have a running company and that part of my life? Do I focus on storytelling and books and that part of my life? And I feel like I've constantly gone back and forth. Like I can't decide which one I want to focus on. So this morning and last night, I've really been in prayer because I pitched a book, and the book is about running, but I have other book ideas that I want to write about. And so, in the season of life that we're in, I understand and have learned that, God didn't create the world in one day. God created the world in 6 days, and he took a day of rest. And so just like Ecclesiastes says, there is a season and a time for everything under the sun. And I need to be patient, and I just really need to lean on the Lord and really ask him, like, what season of life am I in? What do you want me to focus on in this season of life? One of those things is obviously motherhood with becoming a new mom, but how does my dreams and what I feel like you're calling me to do fit into this busy life that we have? And I think that's something that we all struggle with and that we're all trying to figure out is, what is my purpose? What am I supposed to focus on? I feel like we're either searching for our identity and who we are, and then once we grasp who we are, we're searching for purpose. And it's like you always are going back and forth, like, who am I? And then what is my purpose? And it's kind of going back and forth like that. And I just feel like that sometimes the enemy tries to cause confusion in those areas. And because he knows, like, if you really knew who you were and you really knew your calling, you would have confidence in that, and you would have clarity and a clear direction on where to go. And so right now, with going to this writing conference, I've really been like, well, moving forward after this conference, like, what is the Lord calling me to focus on in this season of life? I understand I'm not supposed to do everything at one time. And so what is it that he wants me to focus on right now? And so I am going to kind of take y'all along with how this Jesus time went. But I really feel like he led me to Proverbs chapter 2, verse 3, which that says, yes, if you call out for insight and you raise your voice for understanding. And later on in the chapter, it says, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. And I feel like that was very comforting, because God was pretty much saying, like, I hear you, Carly, like, you're calling out, you're asking questions, you're wanting to know, like, what your purpose is and what you want me to, like, what you want to focus on, what I want you to focus on in this season of life. And so I wrote down, brick by brick, day by day. And what does that mean? Brick by brick, day by day. This is a term that Briston, my husband, uses when he talks about business and entrepreneurship. You don't build a house in one day, and you don't build it in one session, in one night, in one idea. That really successful people build brick by brick, day by day. They think long term. They don't think about tomorrow. They don't even think about a year from now. They're thinking 10 years from now, 20 years from now, the long term, long road, long way ahead of them. And I think that that's important to recognize that, I need to be patient. Joseph's dream didn't come to pass the next day after he had the dream. It took years, and he fell into a lot of valleys, and he probably was wondering, like, what is my purpose? Like, I feel like God's given me this dream, but how does me being in prison, relate to that dream? How does me being a slave in Potiphar's house relate to that dream? Like, what is going on, God? And God used it all for good, and to orchestrate his purpose. And so day by day, brick by brick is just a reminder of, like, as long as I take the small steps, that's something that in the flow of writing that we really talked about, is that as long as you're consistent, as long as you're consistently stewarding the dreams and the gifts that God has given you, it's going to build, and you're not going to be lost. And you might be wondering where to go, but you're going to eventually find the path that God wants you to be on. And so, one thing I wrote is I need to worship while I wait. And I feel like sometimes we struggle with this idea of like, well, I'm just going to sit back and wait, and then God's going to bless me in an area that I dream of being in, and then I'm just going to be so successful at it and do it. And it's like, that's not really a realistic view of how that works. People don't step up to bat, and the first time that they swing the bat, they don't hit a home run. Home runs are made through daily practice and consistently showing up, even on the days that you don't want to. And so that was very convicting for me, and has been, because I feel like I need to be more consistent in my daily habits, and in consistently working on the gifts and the talents and the skills that Christ has put inside of me for the greater good and his calling on my life. And so worshiping while I wait is so important. I think really, guys, that God looks at our attitude and our heart posture in the waiting. And I really do think that determines the blessing that you get after you wait, whether that's here on earth, but definitely in heaven. And I have to keep that in mind of like, it's not about here and now. It's not about on earth. It's about in heaven. And as long as I'm trying to do what I feel like God's calling me to do, I'm going to be okay. So, I wrote down, make the most of today. I feel like there are a lot of times where I waste time. I am dreaming, but I'm not taking action. And that's something that Atomic Habits actually talks about, is this idea that we think when we're dreaming and we're brainstorming that is moving us forward. And even though it's motion, it doesn't necessarily move us forward into the thing that we want. And so making sure that like our progress is actually proactive in moving us forward. So if I'm dreaming and brainstorming about an idea, okay, just don't sit on it. Write it down, do research, pray about it, like actually move forward with it and see if it is the Lord's will right now, the Lord's will later, or if it's just kind of not at all and he's guiding you somewhere else. So something that I wrote is, what is it that I want to do? And I'm just going to admit, I'm an external processor, so writing things down really helps me understand what is going on internally and like where I want to go. And so, what is it that I want to do that I'm not currently doing that I dream about doing? Well, one of those things is writing a blog and vlogging on YouTube. I really enjoy making content. I really enjoy blogging. I really enjoy those things. And I did them during different seasons of my life, and they've kind of like fallen off. So the brick by brick hasn't, I feel like the house was like halfway built. And something that I struggle with is if I don't see immediate results, then I get very discouraged and I just want to quit. And I think that that's normal, but it's, yesterday I was in a session and this guy talked about like, you really don't start until you write 1,000,000 words. And then that's when you start. And it's like, you mean to tell me like before a publisher actually is going to consider me, I have to write 1,000,000 words, 1,000,000 words, guys. And it's like he wrote, 5 or 6 books, self-publishing them before an actual publisher decided to take him on. And, I think one of the things that God really looks at and people really look at who are in a position to give us essentially like our dream and what we want is they're going to look at like, can you actually put in the work? And that's something that I need to keep in mind is like, God is looking at me and saying, are you stewarding your here and now? Are you willing to put in the work no matter the results? And so blogging and vlogging is something that I want to do. Social media, daily encouragement is another thing. I really like posting and, that sort of life. I like sharing things that I'm learning and posting about that. The last thing is books, writing books. I really do enjoy that. And, our first or second session, we had a keynote speaker and she was, it was our second session. She was talking about like building on the platforms that are already growing rather than having to build your own. And it's funny because the inspiration for writing Running with Faith was, number one, I have a daughter. And so, I was like, oh, I have a child. I'm going to be looking at children's books. Maybe I can write a children's book. It also was a lot shorter. So I thought, it might be easier than writing a whole novel. But another reason of why I did that was we already had a platform that was growing, Texas Outlaw. And so I figured, like, okay, you know what? They look at platforms, they look at your engagement and who you can reach, because they want to know, like, that the book will sell. And so I was like thinking in my mind, I wasn't super passionate about the story and like anything like that. I was literally thinking in my mind, like, I can build on something that's already being built, which is Texas Outlaw. And I love it. And I love what I do. And I love relating running to faith. But there's other ideas that if you ask me, I would pick over this one. But it's like, strangely enough, I'm more confident in this one being successful than the other ones. And so, when my next thing that I wrote is like, how can I incorporate these things in my life? And something I had to really ask is like, am I passionate about blogging, social media, daily encouragement, and books just in general? Or am I passionate about certain topics in these books? And I really had to have a heart-to-heart and an honest conversation with myself to, say like, okay, Carly, if you blogged for Texas Outlaw, is that meeting what you want? Because you're blogging. And if you vlogged for Texas Outlaw, is that meeting what you want? Because technically you're vlogging. Or like the daily encouragement, if you consistently posted on Texas Outlaw and put all of your attention on Texas Outlaw, like, you're still doing daily encouragement. Is that enough? And what about books? What about this Running with Faith book and other running book ideas that I have? Like, even though it's not my YA fantasy book, is that going to suffice? Is that enough for you? And I had to like really sit down and ask myself, like, is it the general writing, books, social media, and blogging that I want? Or is it like a certain area in those things that I want? And if I'm unwilling to do it just in general, like, is it actually going to produce the results that I want if I had the opportunity to do it in the area that I wanted to do it in? And I don't think so. I think a part of God transforming us into the image of Christ is us taking those things that we want, and maybe they look a little bit different, and I do it for Texas Outlaw rather than doing it, for myself. So I asked, how can I incorporate these things in my life? And one thing that we're starting this August is we're starting a Texas Outlaw blog, and we're going to be interviewing people, talking about different topics and things like that. Okay, so I'm doing it. I'm doing the blog. I'm doing what I want. And then, something that I've really struggled with is like my niche. Like, do I talk about books? If I talk about books, what type of books am I talking about? Do I talk about running and not books? And if I talk about running, like, how do I talk about running, like, as a mom and a road runner and having this running business and things like that? And I was thinking, like, how can I combine the two? How can I combine my love for books and storytelling with running and things like that? And something that kind of popped out is another thing that I'm passionate about, which is stewardship and how we have stewards of faith. And, stewarding your life for God's glory, and like taking those 7 F's and incorporating them in the blog, in my personal blog. And then, like on social media, really honing in on stewardship, what it means to be a good steward, and like that aspect of my life, because that makes up the running part and the book part. And then, I wrote down some book title ideas to write about for the book content. But, guys, it has really been a journey. I just don't, I feel like every few months I'm like overthinking and just like wondering, like, am I doing what I'm called to do? But, I'm like, I have to realize that I am where the Lord wants me. And if he wanted something to change, he would let me know. I mean, it literally says, if you call out for insight and you raise your voice for understanding, then you'll know the knowledge of God. Then you'll have the fear of the Lord. And he's going to communicate to you what you need to hear in the season of life that you're in. And so I want to move forward from this conference, I want to move forward, trying to take what I've learned at this conference and incorporate it in what I'm already doing today. I lead our marketing department for Texas Outlaw. Like, I am learning about storytelling in a whole new way, not just trying to write a book. I'm learning about it on social media and how you communicate whatever it is you're trying to communicate, and reels, and just a whole bunch of things in marketing of like how to storytell. And that's important. That is a building block to hopefully the books that I will publish in the future. And I will take this knowledge that I've learned and been learning and apply it there. And so, how can I take like what I want, blogs, posts, and books, and how can I implement them in what I'm doing today so that way I'm not super overwhelmed. And I'm excited for what I feel like God is leading me towards in this area. I'm excited about like where I feel like he's, having me go towards and things like that. And so I just can't wait for you to be a part of this journey. And I will say that moving forward, my content will still be a lot about running. I'm going to combine running with faith. That is going to be a constant. And I'm also going to combine stewardship. How do we be good stewards? And I think that all three of those intertwine. And I'm going to use that in our life, in our family, in our fitness, in our finances, in our family. I already said family, in our friends, in our jobs. And I'm going to try to incorporate it into all of those aspects. So I hope you enjoy.